tree planting projects, tree pruning, and the maintenance seminars, invasive species control projects, and other educational opportunities. So tonight, the mayor will read a proclamation recognizing Arbor Day 2023.
Thank you, Ms. Crawford. And with that, I will read the Arbor Day proclamation. Whereas the city of White Bear Lake has historically been committed to maintaining the urban forest in city parks and throughout the city by adding to and replacing its valuable tree stock, whereas the city annually confirms its commitment to the urban forests by promoting public awareness of forestry issues through tree planting projects, tree pruning and maintenance seminars, invasive species control projects, and other educational opportunities. Whereas the city is celebrating its 35th year of being a tree city as part of the Tree City USA program, which was founded in 1976 to celebrate towns and cities committed to growing their urban canopy, and has helped more than 3,600 communities across the country build out their urban forests. Whereas the city recognizes Arbor Day as an annual occasion during which the community pauses to recognize the importance of trees and their impact on our environment and daily lives, and encourages public awareness of urban forestry issues. Whereas trees in our city increase property values, enhance the economic vitality of business areas, and beautify our community and park system. Whereas trees are a source of joy and spiritual renewal. And whereas the mayor and city council desire to extend their support for and recognition of the importance of trees within our city. Now, therefore, I, Dan Lewismet, mayor of the city of White Bear Lake, do hereby proclaim May 18th, 2023 as Arbor Day in White Bear Lake, and with fellow members of the city council, the park board, and city staff do hereby call upon all White Bear Lake residents to participate in the annual Arbor Day observance. All right, we look forward to that. Everybody go plant a tree. Okay, we're gonna move along into item 6, public hearings. We have nothing scheduled. Item 7, unfinished business. Nothing scheduled. Item 8A, new business, conditional use permit amendment request, stadium seating for White Bear Lake area schools. Mr. Lindahl.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The application before you, as you mentioned, is a request from the White Bear Lake area schools related to their North Campus site at 5045 Division Avenue. This request is a conditional use permit amendment, so it serves as an amendment to the original CUP that allowed the expansion of the North Campus site back in 2021. In this case, the expansion that they're seeking is related to the bleachers that are part of the athletic stadium that's part of the overall North Campus site. The original CUP allowed for the athletic stadium to have 1,500 seats, and the applicant is requesting to increase those to 5,000 seats. The property's guided, public, semi-public in the future land use map of the comprehensive plan and zoned public facilities. As part of the original approval that was done in 2021, a project of this size and scope was actually required to conduct an environmental assessment worksheet, or EAW, and that included a wider review than would be typical of a conditional use permit, other conditional use permit processes. The important thing to note, a part of that study as it relates to this one, is there is a traffic study that's done as part of an EAW. And as part of this request, staff required the applicant to update the traffic study, or what we feel was the relevant part of the EAW for this proposal. The applicant's been through a neighborhood meeting and the Planning Commission, and both Planning Commission and staff are recommending approval. The request is located in the graphic you see here in your packet and on the screen. The stadium, as proposed, is generally in the middle portion of the campus. It shows, it would call for, again, expanding the bleachers from 1,500 to 5,000 seats. On the home side of the stadium, the expansion would be from 1,500 to 3,500 seats. And then on the guest side, currently there weren't any seats planned for the guest side, and that would be expanded to 1,500 seats. There's a close-up view of the site here that shows the expanded home seating on the left side of that screen and the the guest seating on the right side. This also shows kind of an aerial graphic view that the applicant put together to show generally how the proposed expansion of the bleachers would be seen on site. Again, here's another graphic of the home side bleachers. The middle portion is the 1,500 seat that's already been approved and constructed, and then it shows the proposed expansion on either side of that existing seating. It's worth noting in this picture also the stadium lighting that's part of this was part of the approval for the original conditional use permit is shown here and already in place. So they our conditional use permit process, as you may remember, as of the first of the year now requires a neighborhood meeting. And so the applicant conducted that back on March 15th at their North Campus. There were approximately 14 attendees to that meeting. That group had generally had questions and concern related to the, the list of topics that you see here, traffic, both the previous and updated traffic studies, what potential mitigation traffic measures could be taken, the size of the bleachers and events, attendance, impact on the surrounding neighborhoods, how the public address system and lighting systems would be used, the district's overall improvements in the city review process and the timing related to those things. And questions also about the future use of South Campus. Of those 14, approximately 7 of those people spoke and were generally, the questions and the comments from those 7 were generally opposed to the project. The Planning Commission then held its public hearing back on March 27th. There were a total of 3 comments that came in via email or phone calls before the meeting, questions, and those were generally opposed. Comments were again related to traffic, parking, noise, and lighting. During the public hearing, there were 9 people that spoke. 3 were supportive and 6 were opposed. Generally, those opposed had similar concerns that we've talked about from the neighborhood meeting and the comments before the Planning Commission meeting. So the conditional use permit looks at a number of criteria, and so your packet goes into more detail about the review of these criteria, but just to run through a summary of those here for you to kind of set the context of our discussion tonight. First, it looks at the consistency with the city's 2040 comprehensive plan. We've talked about being guided public and institutional, and the high school and associated athletic stadiums are allowed uses in those districts, so it's compatible with the comprehensive plan. Then it looks at compatibility with present and future land uses. The previous EAW and staff analysis of that conditional use permit actually went into a fair amount of detail about the compatibility with the surrounding neighborhoods and the efforts on the school district's part to purchase some surrounding property, have increased setbacks, and try to make their campus fit in with the surrounding neighborhood. And staff finds that this particular application doesn't change any of those previously mitigated factors. The third factor looks at conformance with general performance standards, and that can be thought of as the typical kind of zoning standards that I think we look at with most applications. Most specifically related to the expansion of the bleachers, the traffic study also helped us look at, or helped the applicants look at parking analysis for the site. And so there's a fair amount of analysis that went into the parking standard, but again, just to summarize that, the parking study looked at events at the South Campus and then compared them with the conditions that are proposed for North Campus. And so they looked at a typical event, which is, I believe they cited as about 1,600 people at a typical game in the observations that they did through the site and actual ticket sales. And then they looked at larger events, which basically they classified as the homecoming game, and that would be about 3,800 people. And then they also looked at full capacity of the potential 5,000 seat bleachers. Now, there's a number of qualifiers that they put into the analysis related to parking for the 5,000 because it's based on a certain width of seat and getting actually 5,000 people in there. The applicant says is not really practical. It doesn't usually happen that way, given how the size of people and how they sit in those seats. So, but if you look at the assumption that they made in the parking analysis was 3 people coming per vehicle. For a typical event and for the largest event that they have, there's adequate parking on the site based on the number of stalls that they're proposing. When you get to a full capacity event, there is the potential to have a parking shortage, but again, they talked about the practicality of whether or not it would, they haven't experienced the 5,000 person event and whether or not there would actually be the capacity of 5,000 people in the bleachers that they're proposing. The EAW then also went on to look at related items for this, including a visualization category, which specifically looks at the lights related to this and the outdoor glare that could occur from them. Given that the increased capacity of the bleachers doesn't affect the lights, they're not proposing any changes to them. Staff didn't make any changes or recommendations related to lighting. Also looking at noise, the EAW looked at both noise related to the construction that occurs as part of building and remodeling the school and expanding the site, and then they looked at increased noise from the actual site. It is fair to note that when the school is expanded, the analysis they did of the school expansion that found the noise to be acceptable under the levels that they measured didn't specifically include the expansion of the bleachers. But looking at the standards that they would that are typically used, which is you look at standards from the MPCA and the noise levels related to those, generally staff's experience with those is that the ambient noise from an occasional event like this wouldn't exceed those standards. But again, it wasn't specifically measured as part of the EAW analysis. Then the conditional use permit goes on to look at a number of other criteria, including depreciation of values of the surrounding area. The the original conditional use permit made findings related to how high quality schools and high quality facilities are an important part of property values, and that the expansion of the high school should create an overall better property value for the homeowners in White Bear Lake. And staff doesn't see any conflict with the expansion that they're proposing. It also goes on to look at whether or not the site can be accommodated by existing public facilities. That has to do with water and sewer facilities and those kinds of things. And in this case, there isn't an additional capacity that can't be accommodated with the expansion that they already did for the school. There is a noted condition related to getting sewer access or SAC determination, which is what you have to do to make sure you're paying for your use of an expanded system, and that's a standard thing that's done when a facility is expanded. So that's a condition added to the approval that's recommended from staff. And then finally, it looks at traffic generated by the proposed use and whether or not the streets surrounding the site have the capability of supporting that use. So again, there was an updated traffic study that was included and referenced in your packet with a lot of information in it. But to summarize that, both the findings from the applicant's engineer and then the review that was done by city staff finds that the surrounding roads have the capacity to absorb the additional traffic that's being proposed. It does note that that analysis is done in the context of the proposed improvements that are that are called for Bald Eagle, Division, and 8th Avenue. So it's important to keep in mind in that context, and that all of those things are in place and functioning at the time of the analysis to be relevant. And then there are a number of conditions related to traffic that are recommended in that traffic study. Then staff has taken those recommendations from that traffic study and incorporated them as required conditions of approval in the resolution that's before you tonight. And those have to do with requiring potential traffic mitigation strategies and recommendations from the fire marshal about being able to access the surrounding neighborhoods in the event of an emergency. So at this point, staff is recommending approval. The Planning Commission also followed and recommended approval for this application, subject to a number of conditions that are detailed in the resolution that's included in your packet. But just to highlight a few of those is the applicant has agreed that there won't be other large-scale events that occur on the same night as a football game, so as to help kind of mitigate and manage the traffic of the site. That they would implement all of the traffic study recommendations that are included in their packet. Again, we're now making those a required condition of approval. Those have to do with designating drop-off and pickup areas that are outside the parking areas. So people who may drop off people to go to the game don't have to come into parking areas to do that. That there would be parking restrictions and traffic management techniques as that may be necessary from the police department or the city engineer, and that there would be timing of adjustments to the timing of signals at 7th and 8th when they at the intersections of Highway 61, that SAC determination update that I mentioned before, and then again the required intersection improvements are specifically required as a condition of this approval, and those would include the improvements along Bald Eagle this coming summer, and then the improvements along both A Street and Division in the summer of 2024, prior to either the stadium or the school, fully opening. And with that, staff would stand with condition or for questions. I would note that the applicant is here and prepared to make a presentation to the council if they like.
Thank you, Mr. Lindell. At this time, I think we would like to hear from representatives from the district.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. You've been around education for a long time when you remember the mayor as a high school student. So that's where we're at. Thank you, City Council, for hearing this request tonight. I want to acknowledge the diligence of the city staff in walking us through this process. They really have an excellent process for supporting applicants through understanding all the things they need to be prepared for. So thank you to the city staff for that work, and then the Planning Commission too for their support a couple weeks ago. We have with us tonight a host of our folks who have supported us as consultants through this process, from Wold Architects, Larson Engineering, SEH Engineering. So we've got the right people here to answer any really specific or technical questions that you might have. So feel free to ask those for sure. I want to just note that in the Building Our Future bond referendum in 2019 was really an overwhelming statement by our community to support the unification of our high school in the spot where it's at, in the neighborhood where it's at. That's the same neighborhood that in 1918, the city built the first, or the school district built its first dedicated high school building in that location. It always amazes me that during World War I, this community was building a high school. I just think that's an inspiring message about this community. 46 years later, the community built a larger dedicated high school building on that same property just to the north of it. And now 60 years later, another generation of school district residents said, yeah, we want to unify the high school in that location. And so we're really proud that we're able to make that happen. It's going to be a really beautiful campus when it's completed, and to be able to welcome our community members onto school property, not only for school activities, but for athletic activities, for our students to feel the support of the community coming to their high school and supporting their activities. It's going to be a great thing for our community, for our kids, and really for all of us to be able to attend those events. So we have a short presentation where I think we'll just highlight some of the elements of the project, and then certainly available for questions. I have one more thing maybe before she starts, and that's a question that's come up quite a bit in the last few weeks, and that's why now? So the plan was that in the pre-referendum work football would stay at South Campus, and then eventually, when it's possible, would move to the high school site. And that's the plan. That was the plan that we talked about quite a bit. We also, in over 100 presentations that Superintendent Kazmierczak and I did, we talked to community members about when there's the ability to bring high school football and larger events to the unified high school, we would do that. So what's changed is that in 2018-19, we didn't anticipate that we would have the footprint to be able to build the amenities, including the parking and the space to be able to host larger events. That's changed. That was not something we thought would be possible. What hasn't changed is our desire to move those larger events like high school football to the high school campus when we're able to do it. It's just that we're able to do it earlier than we anticipated. So I hope that answers that question, and I'll turn it over to Maria Kennedy. She's an architect with Wold. She's been with us on the project since the beginning and has worked specifically on this stadium project. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. So I know a lot of the graphics you've seen before, but just kind of want to give a little additional context. So if you can advance to the next slide. This plan just gives you an example or the image of how this would be all built out. It's a very schematic level of detail, but just showing you kind of how we've been thinking about the whole site, really interfacing and supporting the community, both for Central Middle School and the high school. And if you go to the next slide, just to give you some context for where we're at today, the current status of construction, if you go one slide back, thanks. The east half of the site is really what's primarily under construction now, which of course will complete by the fall of 2024. So the west half that you see in color has been constructed and mostly built out. You can proceed to the next slide now. This has been reviewed already and of course is in the detail of the original conditional use permit, but there were items on the original stadium design that are not changed as part of this conditional use permit. The lighting and the sound system are not proposed to be modified at all. And the stormwater design incorporated the potential to expand. So next slide. This graphic is pretty detailed at this scale, but really just showing you again on the west side, the expansion proposed to the home bleachers. So that would increase the capacity from the current 1,500 that you see on site as you walk by or drive by to that 3,500 total. And on the east side, it would add 1,500 seats for visitors. The plans here are just some large versions of those. I do want to mention also there's amenities that Tim alluded to, like a concessions building, bathroom building, and other services that this provides, as well as an entry to the stadium. You can probably go past this. The next version here just shows you, yeah, thanks. Again, that 3D view showing the connection of the scale of the existing bleachers and the expansion to the existing that are there. So the proposed would be the same height on the stadium west side, and then they're a little bit shorter on the visitor side, just due to the smaller capacity. Again, showing you that height alignment and the expansion. Those extents show where the existing light poles are, and that's where the existing sound system will be connected to. The sound system is a distributed sound system, so that differs a little bit from South Campus in that that has like one larger speaker. And the distributed system allows, there's multiple speakers around the site, and that was an intentional choice in our planning for the original stadium sound system that allows you more sound control throughout the stadium and to intentionally minimize the amount of sound that would transfer off the site. So again, no change to that, but can certainly answer more questions about it if you have any. And I think these next 2 slides, these really just go into some detail on the traffic study. We do have SEH Engineering who helped us prepare that traffic study to answer any detailed questions you have. But I think the summary that was given of the conditions is a really good summary of what we've all obviously agreed to commit to, and knowing that those are part of the conditional use permit amendment, proceeding with those recommendations that are part of the conditional use permit amendment recommendation from your staff. So if there's any detailed questions on that, we can of course run through them, but those have already been consolidated into the report. So this is another just piece we want to talk about on schedule. This was summarized, but just to have the graphic to see that obviously the Bald Eagle, the west side improvements kind of aligned with the construction schedule and turnover on the west side of the school. Those are planned to be complete this summer. And then on the east side, from a phasing perspective, the construction work as shown in that early graphic is moving to the east side of the site. And again, with those road improvements on Division and 8th Street being complete summer of 2024. And I think that's all we've got for kind of some of the data and facts. Again, happy to answer any questions you have about that. And if there's anything else you'd like to add, Tim, otherwise we can open it for questions.
Kennedy. Council, I am going to open this up for public comment, so if the folks from the district maybe can sit tight for a second, I'm sure council has questions, but at this time, if anybody does have any public comments, I'd invite you to the microphone. Please state your name and address, and you shall be heard.
I guess I might be the first and only. My name is Jeff Taylor, and I live at 5211 West Bald Eagle Boulevard. And I've been a member of the community probably almost my whole life, a former 1979 grad of Mariner High School, which ironically was a school that was built with forecasted growing enrollment, and that never happened, and really saddled the district with 2 high schools for a long time. I guess the first question that I have, I am thankful that I read the White Bear Press because that's probably where I get most of my information. I'm just wondering with the March 15th meeting, I'm not sure how that was communicated. I must have missed that edition, or I had been out of town in March. But a lot of these things are, poor turnout in terms of engagement with the community and the neighborhood. I also, even though, things have changed with all the houses that were purchased in 2019, before the referendum, it was stated 3 separate times, 3 separate occasions that the stadium would remain at South Campus. Now, I understand things have changed with the property and all that, but that's what was stated before an election. Number 2, I guess, concern of mine is just the whole disruption that the neighborhood is already going through. And it's hard for me to understand why it's so important to build a 5,000-seat stadium when the average crowd is 1,600, and why you would build a 5,000-seat stadium when 3,800 people would max out the parking lot. That's 3 per vehicle. If it's 2, you have 600 cars parking in the neighborhood. Why you would build a 5,000-seat stadium when you have a 4,800-seat stadium, which was the stadium we were all told would be used for football, and why you would build a 5,000-seat stadium for 5 football games a year. I don't really think it's, I can appreciate, when I was growing up, this town had 2 high schools and 1 football field, and it was Price Field, and the 2 schools played every other weekend. We now have 1 high school, but 2 football stadiums. I'm not sure that's progress, and I'm not sure that's progress that the taxpayers would agree with. As far as going back to the referendum itself, you could say it was unanimous, but the reality of it is 30% of registered voters in the district voted that day. Not 100%, not 80%, not even 50%. So I guess, my concern is that this thing is kind of being rushed through. We still don't understand the impact to our neighborhood. We already see the increase in traffic on a daily basis. We see people speeding. We see people not stopping at stop signs. We see the rush to get kids to school. And that's before South Campus moves up here. And that's before we decide, we're going to bring 3,800 or 5,000 people into the neighborhood on a Friday night. So I guess, I played sports. I like sports. I think sports are really important, especially for young kids and high school kids. But, sometimes providing everything all at once isn't necessarily the best answer for the community. And it's not just about sports. It's not just about the kids. It's about the people that live here. So I would respectfully request that you delay any improvement on the CUP proposal. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor.
Hi, I just want to echo what Mr. Taylor just said. I don't think it's too much to ask.
Can you just state your name? And
Oh, I'm
address
Mary
for the record?
Pollard, sorry. I just don't think it's too much to ask.
Mary, can you
oh,
say your
sorry.
address as well?
Can I start over?
Sure.
Mary Pollard, 2321 5th Street, White Bear Lake.
Thank you.
Sorry. I don't think it's too much to ask that the school district get the traffic they currently have under control before we okay them to bring 3 or 4 times as many people into the neighborhood. That's all.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to this issue? Please.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Post. I live 2068 3rd Street, about 1 minute that way. I've lived there for a year and a half. I work in the school district. I coach football, coach basketball. Parents are teachers. They were coaches. What I'm doing is I'm listing off my biases that I have. I think it's also very important to understand that people that live within 2 blocks from the stadium are probably most of the people that are going to speak against it. And they have every right to do that, because when change happens, it's hard. When change happens to you, it's really hard, right? And it's happening to them, and it's different for them. And different is not usually good, right? Sometimes it can be good, sometimes it can be not be good. So I think the thing that I think it's important as leaders, this reminds me, I just want to tell a quick story. I'm not going to be up here forever, but I grew up in Lanesboro. And Lanesboro is a really small community. Anybody been to Lanesboro? I knew somebody. Everybody's always been to Lanesboro, okay? So when I was there, I couldn't believe, why are people coming to Lanesboro? All I want to do is get out of here, okay? The bike trail got built, big change. And all I heard as a 14, 13, however old I was, from everybody was, I can't drive through town, I can't do this, can't do that, disruption, 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 right? Same type of stuff. And what I learned from that, because by the time I was graduated and go back there now, is Lanesboro exists because we didn't react to the emotions of change, and we looked at it and said, this is good for the community. It's different for people that have lived here forever, 50, 75 years. But without that, it would be like Elmore, which is where my mom is from. Elmore is right by Iowa, same town, same size, 0 businesses, 0 activity, none of that stuff, okay? So I learned from that is as a leader, you got to remove the emotions and look at facts. What's best, and what I'm asking you guys to do is let's look at the facts and what's positive about this, what's negative about this. So, like was said, every ward passed the levy, from my understanding, right? It wasn't like because Hugo voted, it was the only reason this passed. Every single ward passed the levy. Why did we do that? Because the community decided that what we have now and what we've currently dealt with for I don't know how many years. I remember coming here 20 years ago and we were talking about our facilities and how different they are. And we get by with it. We're one of the only schools that have 9, 10, 11, 12, and how do we deal with that, right? And we finally found a way to deal with that. And I think we found a way in a really great way to deal with that. So what I said last time, and I go back, like factually, our stadium right now is in a neighborhood. And all the things that you're going to hear tonight about their neighborhood is happening in a worse way in that neighborhood because there wasn't a traffic study done there. There isn't 6 different outlets. They aren't improving the roads at South Campus. If you've been to a football game at South Campus, when it's over, there's one way out of the parking lot. And it's an hour-long mess for everybody that lives around there, right? It's a mess. So if we have the opportunity, which it sounds like we do, to improve on something, why would we not do that? Because it affects a different group of people? It's not worse. We're going to hear about how this is worse. It's not worse. It's different. It's a different group of people. And we're trying to do everything, it sounds like to me, to improve the overall situation for our community. It is going to impact the people that are here a little bit more. But that isn't, in my opinion, a reason not to do this. The other thing I heard last time was there's all these events there. It's not just football. Well, we're already going to be bringing 3,000 kids a day there in a year and a half. That's already happening. No matter what you do tonight, that's already happening. It's already been approved. We're already having 40 events there. It's already happening, right? So what we're talking about here tonight is 4 nights a year that are not at the same time as school. So all those kids are gone, right? That, in my opinion, will reinvigorate the neighborhood, reinvigorate downtown White Bear Lake. I was just walking down there yesterday, signs looking for businesses, things like that, right? I think football can help with that. I think if we take the emotions out of it, we all would agree with that. So that's my opinion. I think the community overall agrees with that. And I'm just asking you to think beyond the emotions and think about where we're at and what we're ready for. It's already built. It's already there. They've done a really good job of listening to everybody's concerns and planning for it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Post. Would anybody else like to speak to this issue? Please. Mr. Galvin, if you could state your name and address for the record, that'd be appreciated.
My name is Jim Galvin. I live on 4702 Wood Avenue in White Bear Lake. And I'm glad to be here tonight. And that I came to speak in favor of adding seating and moving football games to the new high school campus in beautiful downtown White Bear Lake. And I have 3 issues I'd like to kind of talk about. They are, number 1, history and tradition of the location and football, community impact, number 2, and then student and student-athlete impact, number 3. I came to White Bear Lake in 1970 as a math teacher and an assistant football coach, and so I know a little bit about the history and have been a small part of the history of what's happened in White Bear Lake. I looked up a little history, and like I think Tim talked about, Price Field, which is right behind Central on the Bald Eagle side, that was named after Charles M. Price, who served as president of the White Bear Lake School Board from 1918, Tim mentioned that, to 1953. And varsity football games have been played from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the early 80s for over 40 years at that same downtown location, which is just a couple football passes away from the new football location. White Bear Lake has always had excellent football programs dating back to the 50s. Dick Mulkern had excellent football teams, excellent programs. He coached in the 50s and was plucked from White Bear Lake to be the head football coach at Hamlin University. And then in the 60s, Dwayne Dietz took over. He continued with excellent football programs and he was plucked from White Bear Lake to the College of St. Thomas as their head football coach. And then in the 1970s, Fred Conrath took over. He continued the tradition of excellence. 1976, a state championship football team. And Fred went from White Bear High School to the University of Minnesota as an assistant football coach. And then Mr. Taylor earlier mentioned this evening that all White Bear Mariner football games from 1972 to about 1980, White Bear and Mariner Hall played home games there, and the annual White Bear Mariner game, which was a big game, that was always played at Price Field also. So White Bear football and Price Field and this downtown location has a very storied tradition here in White Bear Lake. It was Friday night lights. The lights came on, the people came out, the sounds of the game, the action of the game. It was a community event. And then number two, community impact. Because of the success of the White Bear football programs, thousands of spectators every year from White Bear Lake and from other communities flock to this downtown location. On their way to the football games, they drove by our restaurants, our businesses, our churches, our quaint downtown area, and et cetera. And then hopefully on the way back out of town, they stopped at some of these locations, or they made it a point that they were going to stop back and visit White Bear Lake in the future. So it was a real asset to our community. And then last, but probably most importantly, I think, is the impact on our students and our student athletes. This new location will be the home to our students for 4 years now. It used to be with 2 years at North and then 2 years at South. Now, these kids in our school district are going to have a home for 4 consecutive years. Same location. Our players want to play their home games here at the downtown location, not hop on a bus and drive to some other location, play their football games. They want to dress and prepare for the games in their own locker rooms, make a short walk to play the football game on their field, and not hop on a bus and ride to a home game. You know, we want our students and our student athletes to have pride in our programs, pride in our community, and pride in our facilities. And I think by playing home football games at our new stadium, this will help to establish this pride in our students.
Thank you, Mr. Galvin. Would anybody else like to speak to this issue?
Try not to drag this out. Alistair Downey, 1988 Campbell Circle. Enough of the passion about football, and the facility's awesome, the school's awesome. They've done their due diligence in terms of parking and mitigating. You know, change is hard. I no longer have deer in the yard, you know, because we eliminated all the natural grass and everything and the soggy soccer fields. But my concern is on the city side, really, in that we'll deal with the football events, but, you know, Bald Eagle, the crossing of, you know, the crosswalk on 8th to Lincoln, even crossing now coming out of the school, I'm not too sure what the city plan is for either widening Bald Eagle. You know, I know they're still planning on running a sidewalk and the Bruce Vento Trail down to the lake. That'll make the sidewalk nice and wide. But it's, you know, signage or no parking is my concern and the plan for that, because obviously come September, we'll be playing football over there. So that's my only concern. And I live within 500 feet. The stadium doesn't look as good from the back, though, especially on a beautiful sunny evening in April when it's a big mirror. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Would anyone else like to speak to this issue? Seeing none, I will close this public comment period. Well, I know we're going to have questions for the members of the school district. I have a few questions myself, but I'll kick off the discussion as I have established that precedent. So I came into this issue with very mixed feelings because the concept of having varsity football games played at the beautiful new campus is kind of a no-brainer. I went through White Bear Lake High School. I went through the split campus. And while the money concerned me, I voted for the referendum because it was incredibly important for freshmen to have seniors to look up to and keep in check. And the dynamic just didn't work. There's probably maybe one or two other people in this room that actually went through it as a student, but I did, and it was terrible, and that's why I voted for it. And I think it makes sense for varsity football games to be played on campus. The reason I say I went into this meeting with mixed feelings is I also remember reflectively looking at the plan for the referendum, what promises were made by the school district, what the intent was, and I remember it being varsity football games are going to continue to be played at South Campus. Okay, whether that makes sense or not, that's what was said. And I believe there were some improvements made to that facility based on that. So to me, I wouldn't go as far as to say and assign intent that it was a bait and switch. I'll take the district at their word that they went into it with the best of intentions and that this was always the long game. And I can appreciate that more homes were able to be acquired than was originally planned. So how do we solve this problem with Mr. Galvin, how you painted the picture of the history very eloquently? It'd be nice to bring that back to the north side, and I think we probably can one day. The question is it worth delaying a little bit so that we can break in the new high school and having juniors and seniors back on the north side for a couple of years and getting the neighborhood acclimated to what that's going to look like, learn a thing or two so that when we do bring varsity football back to the north side, we can do it while we're putting our best foot forward. So I don't have a vote on this, but I want to put that out there before the council because that's what's rolling around in my head. Again, I mean, I live on the north side and I live close enough that when White Bear scores a touchdown when they're playing on the north side here, I'll hear it, and I welcome that. I mean, I understand noise is a concern, lights are a concern, but to a lot of people, that's kind of cool to live that close. I grew up across the street from Podvin Park, loved hearing the then softball games and the high school football games. It was a part of my childhood. So lights, noise, I think you can get past that, especially for 4 games. Traffic, parking, that's a real concern. I wouldn't want, even if it's only 4 Friday nights a year, to have cars parked all over the place. So that's what I want to throw out to the council, and ultimately what I'd like to ask representatives from the school district, just paint a picture for me, give me an explanation of why we need to keep our foot on the gas and do this starting in 2024 versus maybe delaying it to 2025 or 2026, knowing that I think people ultimately want to get there. So if someone could speak to that, that would be helpful. Please, Mr. Wald.
Thank you, Mayor. And Dr. Kazmierczak will probably have a much more eloquent way of explaining this than I. But, so part of what's happened with this project is we hit things kind of right at the right time. And so we were able to get the referendum passed. We were able to capitalize on some construction project pricing that was pretty reasonable over the last few years. And we had residents say, yeah, we'll sell you our house. So now you have the cost of construction down, the footprint of the property has expanded, which has allowed us to expand the scope a bit, and with the finances of that, we're able to expand the stadium. That might not be the case in 2027, 2028, when we don't have the benefit of having bond money to put into this project. So we have a certain amount of time where we need to spend the bond money, and that's part of the bond referendum. And so we're going to hit those deadlines. But I would just point that out, that we've capitalized on a really pretty soft construction market for quite a while, and that's allowed us to do some things on this project that have made it better than originally expected. I hope that helps. And then, of course, we never expected to have 1,344 parking spots available on the campus.
Okay, thank you. Just for my own clarification, so that I'm crystal clear, we're talking about this starting in 2024, fall of 2024, that season, correct? So not this fall?
Correct. This coming fall, football will be at South Campus.
Okay. And then we're talking about 4 home games, at least for purposes of varsity football.
Yeah, typically
year.
there are 4 home games. It's possible you could have a home scheduled playoff game. And so this year we did have a home scheduled playoff game this last year. Some years we do, some years we don't.
Thank you. Council, any other questions? Councilmember Ed, oh, please.
Can I just address one more
Sure.
thing with your question? The idea that there was a bait and switch, and I know you didn't characterize it as that, and it certainly wasn't. There were, actually, it was about 125 different meetings, community meetings, large and small. That question came up a lot. And the answer was, yeah, we're planning to leave it at South. But the long-term goal was always to bring it to the new site. And that was stated many times, over and over and over again. And in fact, if I had to measure what people felt when they heard that, it was more of like, well, why wouldn't you bring it? Why wouldn't you just do it right away? That doesn't make any sense. Well, we've explained why. The site wouldn't have allowed it, but now the site does allow it, and so that's why we're here tonight.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. And just so you know where I'm coming from, I don't know how large a universe of people this is. It could be 10 people, it could be 2,000. But there have been people that reached out to me that said, I felt like I had a plan and that induced me to vote for the referendum, but if I'd have known this, I might not have voted for it. So I'm sure you can appreciate that that person, I don't know how big a universe it is, feels like that doesn't sit well with me. And I sympathize with that person. So that's why I wanted to address it. Thank you. Councilmember Edberg, I believe you had your hand up.
I was just going to, as long as Mr. Wall was at the microphone. So we have 4, 5 football games. What other events do you have in mind? How many other times are you anticipating this being an issue? Of those 4 or 5, how many are at the high end of that estimate versus the, say, 1,800? And do you have confidence, or what gives you confidence to say the experience that we have under current conditions is an accurate predictor of what we'll have in the future? Get my head around that.
I gotcha. So it's really the homecoming football game is the big one. And when we did the traffic study, we analyzed, was it 3 years of data?
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, Chad Jorgensen from SEH can tell us about that. So it wasn't just a year that we looked at a trend.
Yeah, from Chad Jorgensen, I completed the traffic study for SEH. As part of the traffic study, we had looked at and reviewed ticket sales for the past, I think it was like 3 to 5 years, and the homecoming numbers that were used for the analysis was the highest attendance at a homecoming football game over the past 3 to 5 years, approximately. And so that, generally speaking, that event is the one that would have some operational issues that you see, but overall, from an average football game, is typically going to operate very similar to school dismissal, really. And then, traffic volumes on the surrounding roadway network are going to be much lower compared to when, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when traffic volumes on 61 are obviously much higher than at 9 o'clock at night.
So, get my head around the adequacy of parking for the number of cars. I'll be honest, 3 people per car on average doesn't strike me as a realistic number. I understand that there is other calculations that come into play. What confidence do we have that we are not creating issues that will not flow into the neighborhoods? And I'm thinking not through the neighborhoods, I'm talking about parking.
Yep, and I will say, come out right out and say that there will be folks that park in the neighborhood regardless of event size, whether it's the full, the homecoming event or an average football game. I mean, look at South Campus now, there are folks parked on County Road E, just because that's how people work. They want to get in and out of there as fast as they can. There will be parking in the neighborhood regardless of the number of parking spaces on the school site. As part of our recommendations for the traffic study, we did try to distribute and help encourage patrons to park on campus, opening up a second gate during homecoming to try to utilize that existing parking on site as much as possible. If you have a gate on the northwest corner of the site, people aren't going to be likely to park on the southeast corner over by the middle school because it's a longer walk. So if we open up a gate on that side, it encourages people to park, and utilize the existing spaces that we have available. But to say that they're not going to park in the neighborhood under an average game, that's just not true.
Well, and one of the conditions that was added to the cup was that we'd work with the White Bear Police Department to identify what kind of strategies we could put in place to mitigate that. And maybe it's putting signs out on game days. I think it said we'd agree that we'd eliminate all parking on Division and work with Ramsey County for that to happen to Bald Eagle. Signage in the neighborhood, no parking, if that's one side of the street or both sides of the streets, that we'd work with White Bear Police Department to make that happen.
The other questions I have are for staff, so I'd be happy to yield to others.
Councilmember Jones.
So questions on what other existing events are scheduled for the stadium at a 1,500 capacity beginning this fall or next year? I mean, I'm assuming, is it soccer? Is it lacrosse? Will there be PA?
Yeah, there's soccer events. Well, let's start with the fall. There'll be boys and girls lacrosse events. There'll be track meets, varsity track meets will occur there. And so that tends to have a more, the traffic times out over time. It's not a rush to a hard start.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm gonna.
Sure.
I mean, there's three aspects to this. There is traffic. I got a follow-up question to that, but there's also lights. There's also PA. My question is, we've already approved something that is going to have varsity events that will have lights, i.e. lacrosse, i.e. soccer, that will be playing their games at the new stadium in its existing form of 1,500 seats.
Right, and that would be 19 in the spring.
Right.
Between lacrosse and track and field, and then 16 in the fall, and then if football were added, we'd bring it up to 20.
To the council, my point being, there's already a lot of events being scheduled with lights with PA system. A lot of events already scheduled, adding 4? Question mark. Follow-up, Mr. Wald. So I'm looking at a direct breakdown of what the average football game attendance, meaning how much parking would impact, versus the average dismissal. You brought it up. Is that comparable at all as far as what an average football game is? I mean, you know, back when I played on the cow pasture that we chewed up, I'm sorry to the people who love Price Field, but it was a terrible field. We had the worst facilities ever. But we put in 10,000 people one night. That's a one-in-a-generation thing. That's not going to be every single night. I would like it to be, wouldn't we all? But the reality is how many people are going to be on average for those games? And I'm kind of like throwing that versus dismissal. We're already facing it. The point was brought up, traffic is going to be at a worse time. Do we have?
Yeah, and I think in the packet it explains homecoming this year had 3,050 was what we had for attendance, and I believe the count for cars, and it's in the packet, was 780. Right now we have about 600 cars coming and going every day from the high school, north campus of the high school, and we only have half of our access open, and actually it's not even fully built out yet. So we recognize that's been a headache for residents for a period of 25 minutes in the morning and 25 minutes in the afternoon. It clears very quickly. But when this is built out, there's 3 exits on the Bald Eagle side. There's 3 exits on the Division Avenue side. If you go back to the first slide that we had, you'll see those exits. And then there's also an exit on Bloom to if people can buzz out. Yeah, so you can see there's multiple entrances and exits on each side of the building, and so cars can get out very quickly, head north if they want, head south if that's better for them, but not everyone will be going the same direction.
Follow-up question, Mr. Mayor? Thank you. So my concern stems from the reliability of the White Bear Press, which concerns me that I'm even paying that much attention to it, but it brings up the state high school track meet. And to be honest, I mean, I get economic impact and things, but that would be a one-off event. That wouldn't be, hey, we've got the contract for the next 10 years, which would be an economic development impact, which could be considered. What I'm not interested in saying, to be honest, if I'm going to say yes, approve this to the neighborhood to change, because it is a change. I mean, yeah, we go back to the history, it was 35 years of no lights at Price Field, and then it was 35 years of lights. And then from 1988 or so, it was 35 years of nothing again. The neighborhood's turned over. I have to respect that for the neighbors. It's different now. I could say, yes, school, I'm fine with. There's been a school since 1918. It's always been used that way. But for 35 years, it hasn't been used, at least for a varsity football game. But the aspect of the change in the neighborhood, and do I want to invite more events into that? That doesn't, I mean, yeah, it's nice for everybody. Oh, we had the state high school meet. I don't think that's fair to the neighbors to ask even more beyond the residents of our school district. It's like, yep, it'd be great to host those external events, but it's not fair if it's going to be interrupting even more of what we're already asking, which being near the downtown still gets the homecoming parade, still gets management. I mean, Market Fest, it is all affected, and we ask a lot of our downtown area. We ask a lot of our public works. I don't really want to see anything else there. Now, the occasional neutral site game playoff, right, that White Bear's not involved in, that I get that. You get Relay for Life may want to be there, I don't know. But, so I'm concerned about additional events if this does move forward being added. I think that's of above and beyond. Is there any thoughts to that based on at least the example of the state high school track?
Yeah, that's a good question. There will be requests to use that stadium, I suspect, because it's a nice stadium, especially the track is, will be one of the finest tracks in the Midwest, so there'll be demand for it. We don't have anything scheduled for that. The only thing I could think of that would be a large event right now outside of football would be possibly outdoor graduation. Right, so those who experienced outdoor graduation, White Bear talks about it being just a glorious, glorious thing, very different than graduates sitting on the floor at Aldrich Arena. So that might be an event that we'd like to host there at some point.
My point just to the council, thank you, Mr. Wald, is just, is there a way that we can put a mechanism in there to at least on the conditional use permit that anything outside the norm is asked for or needs to be, I don't know.
Well, maybe Mr. Lindahl could share a little.
But those are
bit of
my
insight.
only, just to the school district, and that's my concerns.
So, Mayor, members of the council, generally speaking, the conditional use permit mechanism allows for the council to add conditions that are directly related to mitigating some condition that's produced by the proposed use. So the council has the ability to add other conditions that may address concerns that you have. I think the city attorney would just remind us there's supposed to be a connection between something that the use produces that you want to mitigate, which sounds like your question would do.
Okay. So notwithstanding that, I just have one other quick question that's relevant to this. for the district. So we do have several conditions. I just want to hear out loud from you guys. This is in the budget. You don't have any objections to some of the road improvements and some of the restrictions that the city has placed? Please.
Yes, thank you. All of the road improvements that are identified are in the budget, and we're prepared to move on. And we'll continue to work with city staff on final approval of those designs. Bald Eagle project will happen this summer.
Very good. Thank you. Council, Councilmember Hughes.
Yeah, and kind of a follow-up for what Mr. Jones was asking. These are today's numbers. Obviously, we anticipate the school growing. So what does this look like in 5 years? How many people are sitting in the stadium in 10 years?
Yeah, it's hard for me to predict that, right, in terms of how many people show up from the community for an event like that. So,
But just in terms of even the size of the school, so we're talking about the kids that are going, is that, I mean, are we looking at an increase or steady state? Or?
Yeah, the school is predicting, future enrollment growth at the high school. And so, most recent demographic reports say that there'll continue to be enrollment growth at the high school. So the high school is built for a maximum of, or for a capacity of 3,200. I don't think we'll get quite that high, but we'll get in the 3,000 range
And
is what's projected.
Where right now?
2,400.
So another third?
Fourth, yeah. Fourth,
And so
third.
then is the parking in the stadium sized to take in another fourth?
Well, the stadium would, okay. I'm sorry. I would just say the stadium will have a capacity at which it's full and you quit letting people in, I guess.
I think I'll just add, and Chad could certainly comment on this as well, but the original traffic study that was part of the conditional use permit was planned around that full capacity, 3,200 students. So the parking that was evaluated, the road improvements that really are recommended, obviously, as part of that original conditional use permit was based on that number. So I think that might answer some of your question as well.
Yeah, okay. And actually, I have a question about the traffic study. So you've got about 130, 150 cars parked in the neighborhood.
Approximately, yeah.
Are those in no parking areas?
I would know, obviously not. They would be scattered where you can park.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty sure? Really sure? And I'm only asking that because if we're going to consider no parking areas and it's not useful, then why are we considering it?
It becomes an enforcement issue at that point to make sure that motorists aren't parking where they shouldn't be parking.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else on the council have any questions specific for the representatives from the school district? How about questions for staff? Councilmember Edberg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Lindahl, the report identifies a couple of different ways that we can mitigate parking or prohibit parking. So in your presentation, you talked about traffic in the neighborhood. I'm not clear if that referred to parking in the neighborhood or moving traffic through the streets in the neighborhood. And there's some semantics in there, but there are some differences to me as to whether it's cars that are on their way through versus, hey, they're sitting there for 3-4 hours type of thing. Can you elaborate on, and so for example, limitations on parking? We've already had a discussion about signage on Bald Eagle as an example and so forth. From your perspective, or perhaps Mr. Cowpies, I'll defer to whichever of you think is the best voice, how should we be thinking about mitigating the impact on the neighborhoods to the extent that we are able?
Mr. Mayor, or members of the council, as far as parking restrictions go, both in the council packet as well as what currently exists, I don't know if you want to, we prepared a little bit of a little slide here, but I'll go to the next one. There you go. So we took a look at what is existing kind of surrounding the campus right now as far as parking restrictions go. Currently on Division, we have no parking on both sides, basically from the north corporate boundary of the railroad tracks down to, I believe it's down to 5th Street. I think it's 5th, right? Of course, it's you had to get the whole campus on one map. But so it goes down, and then it goes to single-sided, no parking, where it shows in green, where Mr. Lindahl is highlighting. There are one-sided parking restrictions on Bloom, where you see in the yellow. There's also no parking restrictions on 9th Street, as well as 12th east of Division. There's no parking for, school time. A lot of that is going to help with getting traffic in and out of events, as well as for school release time, really making a a safer condition. The traffic study, as well as staff, put in the report that we would also would like to see no parking on the east side of Bald Eagle along the campus, also helping to create better sight distances, things like that, to allow safer exit. So that's what's in place today. There's obviously additional parking restrictions that can take place beyond that. If you go to the next or previous slide, I guess. So down at South Campus, we actually have permit parking, which occurs only during the school in session. So basically, Monday through Friday, 8 to 3 school hours. It is not enforced, or not it's shown on the signs. It's not enforced on weekends or evenings or events. Talking with public safety, there's not a huge issue with parking in the neighborhoods down there during events currently. Not that if we went to North Campus that we couldn't look at a similar process up there, whether we expand it for just, I'll call it school day if it becomes an issue. And basically what they at South Campus looked at is how far out would somebody reasonably walk? If you're rushing to get to school and you park out on the street or don't want to buy a parking permit, are you going to walk 2 blocks, 3 blocks, 4 blocks? So really looking at kind of that general area around the campus that makes it rather uncomfortable or unreasonable for somebody to park beyond that parking permit area. In talking with our public safety and our chief of police, it works rather well down there, and residents are quite happy with the outcomes of it. So again, we could look at something like that around North Campus. It could be, go as far as to sign it that it also includes events. There's no event parking in the neighborhood as well, forcing people even further outside a certain ring. So those are some of the strategies from a parking standpoint. There's also strategies from a exit condition where you can, and again, Mr. Lindahl and I left it more encompassing, that we can look at release of vehicles out of parking lots. So having somebody on site that is managing traffic exiting the site. We can have officers or have the school district hire officers to go manage traffic at certain intersections if they become an issue. The traffic recommendations lay out that we would potentially adjust signal timing at 7th and 8th Street to allow vehicles to exit. So those are some of the strategies that we can look at from a kind of active management versus just using the the stop signs as signals as they sit most of the time.
Councilmember Edward.
Thank you for that. So the concern that I have is the amount of overflow parking that would end up in the neighborhoods and creating issues for homeowners. I don't know that it's a massive number of nights that would happen. I actually think the parking conditions will be far better with the new facility. Parking lots are there. We have there will be a lot of them. Nonetheless, the inclination of some people for easy, rapid access or easier parking, maybe they want to go visit Mr. Walsh and knock on his door before the game. But that would be my concern. And so I want to signal that if we need to consider more active strategies signage, limitation on parking in neighborhoods, that I'm very open to that. I've seen what happened around Old Mariner, and how without having, in the days before signage was implemented, we had lots of parking occurring down